Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
The Scarecrow Corpse by Kris Mallory. Narrated by Markiplier. The following testimony was emailed to me recently by an old friend. I haven't heard back from him. I hope he's okay. As you know, I'm in, or was in, training to be a coroner. My education was almost complete, and I had been working a paid internship with a well-known medical examiner in the Washington, D.C. area. All that changed a few hours ago when I was fired from the office for refusing to participate in what I believe to be a cover-up. Even though they warned me about consequences for leaking any information about this case, my conscience wouldn't be clear if I kept quiet. This is something people need to know. A few days ago, we received a call from the Metro Police about a possible body discovered on the Red Line. Since working here, we've responded to a few calls in the subway system. The first time, it was a woman who tripped over someone's rolling suitcase while trying to pass by on the escalators. She ended up with a broken neck. Twice we went out there for a heart attack, once for a late-night mugging that went bad. The poor guy was stabbed repeatedly in the stomach, even though he handed over his watch and wallet like the mugger requested. So far, I haven't seen anything especially gory, and it was a bit of a letdown when the dispatch officer said the man was found just sitting on the train. Is it wrong that I've been looking forward to a call about someone either jumping or being pushed in front of a train? The interesting thing is the wording of the dispatch request. Possible body. If the word possible is in front of body, maybe it's the paramedics that should be responding and not the coroner's office. When we arrived, the paramedics actually were on the scene, so we figured it was just a miscommunication and we were called out prematurely. Police tape blocked off the entire station platform. From our view at the top of the escalators, we could tell something wasn't right. The paramedics stood outside the door to the train car and they weren't actually doing anything except arguing and pointing at a body slumped up against a window inside. We could have left, but since it was a slow evening, we decided to take a look anyway just to see what was going on. As we approached, I overheard some of the conversation between the two paramedics. "He's dead, right?" said the older of the two. "Dead people don't do that." "Do what?" I thought. Once they saw us, they quickly agreed that the man was dead and promptly left the scene to us. Clearly, this wasn't a call they wanted to handle. I can understand that. The police weren't much help either. I chatted with the officers on the scene while the doc went in to take a look at the man on the train. One of the detectives commented that there weren't any clear signs of foul play. The witnesses all claimed that the guy just sat down like everyone else and then he stopped breathing. Natural causes, I thought. Seemed like a pretty cut and dry case, but when I looked over my shoulder at the doc, he seemed confused. "Look at this," he said to me as I walked into the train. As I approached, it seemed like the man was just napping, like a lot of train riders do when they know their stop won't be coming up for a while. "Look at what?" I asked. "His eyes." The man's head was forward, with his chin to his chest, so that I had to kneel down to get a good look at his face. As I'm doing this, the doc is talking out loud like he tends to do, just going over his mental checklist. "Not breathing, no pulse, his skin is cold to the touch, approximate time of death, 6 to 8 hours ago." I'm in the aisle of the train, trying to make do with a pin flashlight since the dim lighting on the train wasn't helping things much. The man's eyes were open, and they seemed to be staring at me. It's not uncommon, so I lean in closer hoping to figure out what it is the doc wanted me to see so that I don't look like an idiot. And then he blinked. I jumped back as quick as a mongoose would jump away from a cobra. "What the fuck?" I tried to say. "Exactly," the doc said. "Gotta be a muscle spasm, right?" "You would think," he says. But watch this. He grabs the guy by the hair and pulls his head back. With his other hand, he waves a finger in front of the man's open eyes. which then began to follow along as the doc moves his finger left and right. Then the man looked at me and blinked again. "Have you ever seen anything like this before?" I ask. "Nope." "And he's dead?" "As a doornail." We let the officer in charge know that we couldn't determine the cause of death on site. A full autopsy would need to be performed to make any kind of determination. She made a note in the report that this body had a tendency to follow you with its eyes and occasionally blink. Off the record, she told me the whole case bothered her. The man, she said, didn't have any identification, credit cards, watch, jewelry, a phone, or even money. All they found on him was a train ticket and a napkin. Once we had him back at the office, we changed into our examination coveralls. I was asked to deal with his clothing. The man watched me the whole time as I stripped off his business suit. He even winked at me once. Also, a few odd things were noted about the clothing. First, he wasn't wearing any undergarments. Normally people wear a t-shirt, boxers, a brief, and socks. This guy wore none of those things, but for some reason, he had on 2 belts, one over the other. The doc switched on his tape recorder and then turned on the buzzsaw. I watched as he performed the Y incision, and I made a mental note of his perfect technique so that I could try and do it better next time. I'm telling you, the doc is a real artist. Next came the enjoyable cracking sound as the ribcage was pried open. While this was happening, the man's eyes watched us. I could almost swear he was smiling too. Over the next hour, the doc made notes as he did the exam. He handed me each organ to be weighed and cataloged. There was nothing strange or out of the ordinary about any of the internal organs. "Okay," the doc said. "Let's take a look inside his head. I want to see what's causing the eye movement." "Listen, do you mind if we tape the eyes shut first?" I tried to remain as professional as I could, but the constant blinking unnerved me. The doc didn't mind, so I took some suture tape and worked up the courage to manually close the guy's eyelids and tape them down. Immediately, they started moving fast. His whole face was convulsing and contorting itself, trying to break free of the tape. "I don't think he likes that," the doc said, and then he removed the tape from the man's eyes. The violent motion stopped right away, and the man winked at the doc. "This isn't natural," I said. "There's a scientific reason for everything. It's our job to find it," the doc replied. "But he actually fought to get the tape off his eyes." "I guess he wants to watch. Now, do you want to remove the skull, or should I?" I'm too shaken to handle the equipment, so I watch as the doc works the saw around the man's skull. The bastard is smiling. I'm sure of it. He's staring at me and blinking his left eye and then his right eye back and forth. I hear the familiar popping sound caused by the top of a skull being pulled off. "Whoa. Okay," the doctor says. "What is it?" I ask as I'm walking around to see what he's seeing. The man's eyes follow me, of course. "I think I might have to call this one in." Dear God. The brain was missing. "Doc?" I ask. "Not now. Pack up and go home. I'll finish cleaning this up." He's saying this as he's already dialing a number on the phone. "But just go. I'll call you later." It isn't a request. I know when to shut up and listen. I make my way to the door knowing that the man is still staring at me. "And don't say anything to anyone." The doc never called me back. Each time I tried to reach him, it went to voicemail. I tried to go back the next day. Security won't let me in the building. They said I was to await further instructions while on paid leave. That was 4 days ago. This morning I hear a knock at my door. It's a man who said he was with the medical examiner's office, but he looks as if he's with the CIA, FBI, NSA, or some other 3-letter agency. He asks if he can come in to talk. I open the door to let him in, and as I do, I notice 2 other similarly dressed men sitting in a black Suburban across the street. The folder he hands me is a case file for the John Doe that was found on the train. All of the notes about the eye movement and the blinking were removed. There was no mention of anything out of the ordinary, let alone a missing brain. It's already got the doc's signature on it, and this man is asking for me to sign it as well. I try to tell him the file is wrong, but he holds up a hand to stop me from speaking. "This is how it happened. Sign it," he said. I ask about the doc. I want to know why I haven't heard from him. He says the doc has been let go. The way he says it makes me think the worst. I refuse to sign it and ask to speak to the director of the medical examiner's office. The man informs me that would be impossible and that I am to be fired. But fired isn't the word he used. The word he used was terminated. He leaves when I ask him to go, but he warns me that mentioning this to anyone would have serious consequences. As soon as the door closed behind him, I packed a bag and took off. I saw that a black Suburban was parked at the end of my street, and I might just be paranoid, but I think it pulled out after I did. Just in case I was being followed, I changed directions several times. When I felt it was safe enough, I pulled into a nearby residential neighborhood and found an open Wi-Fi signal. I think something strange is going on in DC, maybe elsewhere as well. I don't know what it could be, but I feel like the doc and I stumbled onto something we weren't supposed to know about, and now we're in danger. I found the doc's home number online. When I called, it went straight to voicemail. I tried to leave a message for him, but the line went dead once I began talking. If someone is monitoring my phone calls, it's possible my car is bugged too, and they already know exactly where I am. Again, maybe I'm just paranoid or crazy. Maybe there is a completely logical explanation for the Scarecrow corpse that stares and blinks and winks and smiles. I can't imagine how anything like that could exist or why. I'm scared. Really, really scared. I decided the only thing to do would be to write this and email it out to everyone I know. Hopefully this information will make it to someone. If you've received this and haven't heard back from me by tomorrow, then I'm probably dead, and you'll know what I've written is true.
As a doctor, I'm bound by doctor-patient privilege to not disclose the specifics of what I'm about to tell you. But as a human being, I feel compelled to share. This is, without a doubt, the most horrific story I've ever had the displeasure of being a part of. It was 2009, and my schedule for that day was light. I was just finishing up my lunch when I got a call from a friend and colleague who had his own practice in the same building as me. Sometimes we would send work each other's way when we knew the other could use it. I was a bit elated at the prospect of him calling me because I'd just begun going over my books and stressing a bit.
Are you busy right now? I'd like to send someone up to you.
He said. No, my afternoon is barren. What are the details?
It's a walk-in. From the look of it, an eating disorder. Her mother is concerned.
Eating disorder. Those can be unpleasant. I'd actually had a bulimic throw up in my office once when I stepped out momentarily to check my calendar. Still, I needed the work. All right, send her up. I tried to tidy up my desk to make my office look more presentable and professional while I waited. 10 minutes ticked by and no patient showed up, so I stepped out to go looking for her. When I got to the hall, there was a small contingent of people standing around the elevator. They were talking amongst themselves. What's going on? I asked.
The elevator's broke.
Someone said. Shit. I bet she's on there, I thought. What floor is it stuck on?
10th and 11th?
Yeah, that would be about right. My colleague's office was on the 10th, 3 floors down. I knew from experience that it could be anywhere up to an hour before they got the elevator working again. I hoped she wasn't claustrophobic. Returning to my office, I called downstairs.
What's up?
My colleague asked after picking up. She's stuck in the elevator. He laughed.
Really? Poor thing.
What's her name?
Amelia.
He paused.
Amelia D. something.
All right, thanks. If you got any impressions on her from your brief visit, maybe you can share them later. Over drinks?
Sure,
Don't tell me. I want to form my own opinion first.
Okay.
True to form, an hour and 10 minutes later, I heard a loud cheer from the hallway, indicating the elevator had started working again. I should go make sure she's all right, I thought to myself, and went out to join the throng of people standing around in the hallway. There were a lot more people by then, and I couldn't make my way to the elevator doors or even see them from where I was, but I could hear it when the elevator dinged, indicating it was stopping on our floor, and the rolling mechanical sound of the doors opening. There was a loud gasp from the crowd of people, followed by a lot of jabbering.
Holy shit!
Someone said quite loudly. People started hustling away from the elevator, shoving past me. I struggled against the tide and made my way to where a number of people were standing around, staring into the elevator cab. As I approached, I could smell this stench. It was like stumbling into the apartment of a recluse who hadn't come out or bathed for years. It rolled like a wave out of the elevator and cascaded over everyone in the hallway. A young man in a business suit who looked dressed for an interview was covering his mouth and nose with a handkerchief. I skirted around him to see into the elevator. The woman in the elevator was not at all what I was expecting. Massively obese, she looked like she weighed somewhere around 500-600 pounds. Her face was so puffed up, her eyes were barely visible, just 2 dark dots above her cheeks. She had frizzed out brown hair that still had curlers in it. The notion that I was smelling a recluse seemed all the more plausible at the sight of her. Her mouth was covered with what looked like greasy barbecue sauce. There was even some sort of gristle at the corners of her lips. There was more of it all over her hands and wiped down the front of her shirt. It looked like she had come straight from an all-you-can-eat rib buffet. Clenched tightly in one of her hands was a big black trash bag that sagged full of something that seemed to slosh around inside it. The smell coming out of it was nauseating. The woman stepped out of the elevator, her eyes and nose running with tears and mucus. I stepped forward while everyone else backed away, horrified. "Amelia?" I asked her. She looked at me through her beady little piggy eyes, her cheeks covered with that vile red gunk and streaking with tears, and opened her mouth. For about 3 seconds, I had the horrible notion that she was going to vomit an entire barbecue on me.
I was hungry.
She stuttered with a thick southern accent. The young man in the suit heaved involuntarily at the smell of her breath, and then strode away, trying to maintain his demeanor. "That's okay. Do you want to talk about it in my office?" I said, reaching out to help her. Seeing me reach out to her, she clenched her black trash bag tightly and hugged it to her chest. The contents of it made a sickening squish sound. I could taste my own lunch in the back of my throat. "Is that yours?" I asked. "I'm not going to take it." She started sobbing, this horrible, almost hob-like squeal of a sob. Honestly, I didn't want to touch her. I wanted to go back into my office, lock the door, and pretend I was glad my afternoon was completely empty. The smell wafting off her and off that bag of spoils was going to be permeating every crevice of my office for days. I just knew it. Still, this was a human being that had come seeking my help, and I was not about to turn her away. "My office is right down the hall. Why don't you come with me?" I started walking. In my head, I said, if she doesn't come with me, fuck it. She can go back to her apartment that's probably filled with roaches and feces and who knows what other ungodly things, and I'll find someone else to help. But she followed me, lumbering on legs that stretched the limits of the sweatpants she had on. I held the door open for her and she waddled in, kneading the contents of that trash bag in her thick sausage fingers, making it belch and splurch. She stopped and just stood there in the middle of my office.
The elevator got stuck.
She mumbled. "Yes, I'm sorry about that. I hope you were all right." Thank goodness you brought something to eat, yes? She started crying again, squeezing her trash bag, and I was afraid it was going to explode and leave God knows what all over my office floor. She nodded as her face turned red and tears poured out of seemingly every pore of her head. I went and got her a box of tissues and handed her a couple. She tried to take them while still holding onto the bag with both hands. "Would you like me to hold that?" I offered, praying she'd say no. She shook her head. "What do you have in there?" I finally decided to ask. She huffed and snorted, trying to inhale all the fluid back into her face. Using one of the tissues, she mopped her eyes and mouth, getting blotchy red smears all over the place.
Leftovers?
She stuttered. Then her chest started heaving, and she threw her head back and started bawling again. Her face was like a fountain. She was so utterly miserable, and I really started to feel bad for her. "Look," I said, "getting stuck in that elevator was obviously pretty traumatic." Her wailing hit a crescendo. "So why don't we postpone things until you've calmed down a bit?" She struggled through her sobbing.
You want to meet with me?
Well, yes, but not today. Why don't you go home and try to relax? I don't think you're in the right frame of mind right now to talk. So let's schedule an appointment for later this week. How does that sound? I walked back to my desk and got out one of my cards. Her mouth was quivering and she looked ready to collapse into a pile of screaming phlegm, but she was calming down a bit, just nodding more than anything. And she took my card with the same sticky fingers holding several drippy tissues.
Thank you,
she said quietly. I couldn't read her face at all. Her features were so red and swollen and wet that she seemed almost blank and expressionless. "Do you want me to escort you down to the lobby?" I asked, "in case something happens with the elevator again? It should be all right, but I don't want you to be nervous." She shook her head.
That doesn't seem like a good idea.
Okay. And with that, she turned around and waddled out of my office, slowly, sobbing slightly every now and then. With her went that sloshy black trash bag, and with them both went that putrid aroma of filth and squalor. I literally breathed a sigh of relief as I heard the door click shut. She never called me back. It was a week later that I finally got around to having drinks with my colleague from downstairs. We were relaxing, having a couple beers, and I suddenly remembered her. "Oh, thanks, by the way," I said.
For what?
"For Amelia."
Who?
"Amelia. Eating disorder. Last week you sent her up to me, remember?"
Oh, right.
He sipped his beer.
The one who got stuck in the elevator. How did that go?
"She was a wreck," I said, sobbing and practically hysterical. I talked her into rescheduling, but she hasn't called me to make an appointment.
Did you talk to her mother?
No, I didn't get any information from her. I gave her my card.
What did you think?
He asked. "Classic food dependency," I said. "Definitely a binge eater." Her face was just all...
No, not the mother, I mean Amelia.
"What?"
What did you think of Amelia?
He said again. "I'm telling you what I thought."
Amelia, the scrawny 12-year-old girl, you think is a binge eater?
"What? No, that's not..." And then it hit me. Was her mother with her?
Yeah, I sent them both up to you.
They were in the elevator together? He looked at me, and the same dawning realization came over his face. Needless to say, she never rescheduled. Amelia D. something. Nor did her mother, the nameless, obese woman I met that day at the elevator, smelling like death, covered in gore, and carrying her trash bag of sloshing leftovers.
I've been a national park ranger for close to 2 decades. Protocols have changed a lot in that time. I write this just to try to keep people safe for the next time you venture to the big outdoors. Let me tell you about the last park I worked. I can't be too specific about the location for my job's sake. Anyway, we had clusters of campsites so that we rotated annually. The idea was to prevent one group from getting overused and worn down, let nature regrow a little bit. The winter had just passed, and our big summer season was a few months away. I'm sent out to check the suitability of the campsites to decide which ones need time to recover and which ones we can open up. Winters here are cold. Not too many people camp during the winter, aside from rugged masochists and Boy Scout troops led by people who believe they are rugged masochists. I didn't expect to find much out of the ordinary. The first site was cleared and ready to go. As I'm trekking to the next site, I see what looks like some debris and junk down a ways in a river valley. Looks like some jackasses set up an unauthorized camp down there. Usually when that happens, they leave garbage and smoldering fires. This is going to be a pain to clear up. I approach, seeing the telltale wreckage of what must have been one hell of a party. Crap scattered everywhere, skeletons of tents still raised up, and blood. I stop and time stops with me. Pools of blood are spread out along the ground, next to signs of something heavy being dragged into the brush. I pull my radio off my belt and pause. I then pull my Glock 22 out of my holster and rack one round. I'm a certified law enforcement officer, but I haven't had to use my gun in a long time. I quickly look around for any movement, then get on my radio and call in for backup. While I wait, I listen. Silence. Silence in nature isn't good. Prey get quiet when they sense a predator. I hope all the birds are being still on my account. I edge forward slowly, looking for anyone or anything. A shredded plastic cooler, a tent that has been annihilated, with more blood splashed on the walls and inside. And people died here, I know it. You can't lose that much blood and just walk off. But no people. Shreds of clothes and a little viscera drawing all the damn flies here, but no people. I've seen bears rummage through camps and destroy anything that looked edible. There are wild hogs here that cut trails through the deep brush and are even more dangerous than the bears, but this isn't either of them. The devastation here is just too much. Some scourge of God came through here and just ripped everything to pieces. Finally, backup arrives, and I'm sent to report to HQ. They even brought medics out here. I don't know why. There's no one here to save. One of the new recruits vomits at the scene. I'm glad to get the hell out of here. I get back in HQ as a buzz. Only 4 people work there, but calls are ringing, printers printing, and the air feels electrified. The manager sees me and signals me to his office. He's pale, ashen-looking, bloodshot eyes. I sit down by his desk, and he goes to the door and locks it. I've never seen him lock that door. He asks me what I saw. I tell him, uninterrupted. He looks even paler afterward, and his hands tremble a bit. There's a very long pause, and I expect more questions. He doesn't ask any. I leave, then hear the door lock behind me. After a few minutes, I hear him call someone up, and a long, low conversation ensues. I never see him again. Word comes down from on high. We're assigned a new manager, one who excels at what he calls crises. His first order of business, a controlled burn of the unauthorized camp and the sites closest to it. I'm not arguing. I watch the smoke rise in the distance and pray that's the end of it. New orders. Relocate the existing campsites closer to HQ. Before we do that, we stake out a few trail cameras at the new locations just to make sure it's not in the middle of a nesting ground. We put up a few cameras pointed at the hog trails through the brush for good measure. A couple of days pass, and we go out to collect the footage. The new manager takes it all and starts studying it in his office. A couple of hours into reviewing, he freaks out. Starts screaming and yelling, gets on the phone, calling up the line, spitting more obscenities. He spends the rest of the day and that night in the office calling up specialists and planners. Next morning, I show up for a meeting. Manager doesn't look like he slept. Massive changes afoot. He lays out our new plans, including massively bright lampposts circling the park border, as well as floodlights around the ranger station. Campsites need to be moved even closer in, clear lines of sight from the light if possible. I butt in, telling him that defeats the point of going camping. If you're just going on a short walk through the grass, then setting up so close you can see the parking lot. He tells me to shut up, that it's just the start. The park now closes at sundown, sharp. Also, we're now required to have a long gun on our person at all times. Now, it isn't uncommon for rangers to carry an AR-15 or a Remington 870 shotgun going out in the deep woods. There are wild and rabid animals out there. The real concern are massive pot growers. These aren't your chill neighbor who hides a few plants behind the tomatoes. They run the spectrum, from large-scale suppliers who like their privacy and dislike law enforcement to anti-government crazies who think we have no right over them, the true patriots. Both groups have a few common points. They tend to be well-armed, they do not like lawmen, and they won't shy away from taking a pot shot at some dumb poor ranger who finds himself in their fields. Keep in mind, Elliot Ness, Mr. I fought Al Capone in one, got scared off busting up Appalachian moonshiners because they constantly sniped at him in the foothills. They shoot to kill. Those are the reasons we keep the big guns around, not routine patrols. I drew the short straw and got the overnight shift. Manager tells me more changes to protocol will be listed when I return. Overnights used to be easy. Monitor the radios, bust up the parties if needed, check for poachers if they're operating nearby, make sure the forest doesn't burn down. I clock in and, per instructions, go to the gun cage. My, things have changed. Our shotguns have new rifled barrels, so they can handle the solid slugs we've been issued. That's the kind of firepower you want to take down a charging bear. God forbid you ever need it. The AR-15s have been stepped up too. The old 15-round magazines have been replaced by 30-round ones. Someone even snuck us in hollow point rounds. Makes no damn sense. Shooting in the woods, you need full metal jacket ammo so the rounds don't go wild when they touch a twig. Hollow points just exist to do more tissue damage. This is ridiculous. This is overkill. We're not a war zone. We don't need this firepower. Next to the radio, there are new instructions. Now, we're not allowed to directly respond to emergency calls. We can reply, figure out what the issue is, then we report to a new phone number I don't recognize. Time passes slowly tonight. I'm not even allowed to leave the building until sunup. A few uneventful nights pass. The new floodlights and lampposts are frying my eyes. It's so bright out there a blind man could see. A week later, some kids roll into the lot. They grab their backpacks and start hiking up the ridge. I know what they're up to. No one has booked a campsite that night. Cheap young'uns going on a campout that'll be a raging party. I wait for the sun to go down, confirming they're not out for a day hike. I call my manager to report. He instructs me to call the new number. I report up to them now. A curt voice answers the phone. He asks my park, then pauses. He asks the issue. Bunch of kids on an unauthorized site. Do I go break it up? I can see their campfire out the ridge right now.
No. Do not leave the building. Do not attempt communication. That is all. Report if there are any developments.
Right after daybreak, the manager rides up. It's real early.
Have you seen them?
Did they leave? No. Car's still there. Let them rest. They're probably all hungover. He curses non-stop. He then goes inside to make a call. I'm outside looking up the ridge when he exits the station. One AR-15 in his hand, another one strapped across his back, Glock on his hip. He marches single-mindedly toward his car. I try to ask him what in God's name he's doing, but he isn't listening or responding. He takes a jerry can of gasoline from his car and marches up the ridge. I yell after him. To no reply. I consider following him. That doesn't seem like a good idea. I go back inside and call the number. The same curt voice, the same direct questions. Yeah, the manager went up to that campsite, armed to the teeth and carrying gasoline. What the hell do I do?
Stay there. Do not interfere. Backup is inbound. Report if there are any developments.
About that time, I start to see smoke wafting off the ridge. 2 vans ride into the lot at a screaming speed. 12 men, heavily armed and armored, exit quickly. I go out to check. Hey, who are you guys? What's going on? The men are all lined up with that impeccable military precision. One of them, a commander, I assume, exits the vehicle last. He says, "Which direction did he go?" I mean, he's up there. I point at the increasing smoke. The men fan out and start jogging up the ridge. I hear rifles cocking as they leave. I try to shout after them, but no response. I look at the vans they came in, large, nondescript. They just say DOI response team on the side. Half an hour later they return, dragging the manager with them. He is bound in zip ties. He screams. "I did what needed to be done, trust me! It's worse than they thought! We can't stop this! Burn it all!" They throw him in the back and sedate him. Commander approaches me, my neck hairs bristle in cold fear. "I need to see the office. All computers and anything with a hard drive is coming with me. He mentioned videotapes. I need those too." I unlock the doors and they ransack the place. Everything gets taken. Printed reports from the last few years disappear into those vans. The videotapes get bagged up and held by the commander himself. He studies the gun cage. "Cute. You're out of your league," he scoffs. Finally, they found everything they looked for. The commander tells me, "Call the number. Tell him it's contained. You need a new superior. Also, don't talk about this to anyone." They leave, and just on cue, the fire brigade and a few news vans show up. The fire is contained, the news reports say. Rumors of missing campers are unsubstantiated at this time. Still, the rumors alone are enough to scare off this season's campers. Quick change-up of managers is chalked up to bureaucracy. The press dies down after a week or two. The new manager's very good at dealing with them. Thankfully, with no new campers and our now even shorter open hours, we can get more work done around here. Rebuilding the station took some time, and we just set up the new campsites. They're practically spitting distance from the station. Nothing dramatic happens for a few days. Then on a whim, the manager tells us to set up some cameras around the station and the campsites. There's usually so much human activity around here, all you see are some raccoons, maybe the rare hungry bear, but we humor him and set him up all around. A couple of days pass. We collect the footage. I play poker with one of the rookies while the manager watches hours of footage of an empty but brilliantly illuminated parking lot. Then he gets to the footage around the station. Screams come from the office. We barge in, and he's stamping on the camera hard drives, gibbering things I can't understand along the lines of, "Tell me it was clean, safe, no recent activity. Bullcrap here, I'm not gonna do it." He barks at us to leave. Later he makes a call. Rookie goes up to the door and listens in. Rookie comes back reporting, "Yeah, he's demanding a transfer. Says they lied to him. Something about they didn't do their jobs properly. He's not prepared or equipped here." Then I just heard the phone click and some sobbing. Hours later, my manager exits the office. His shoulders are slumped, defeated. We cut our hours even further. Practically open on weekends only. We'll have a full staff ready those days, but a skeleton crew the rest of the time. Campers are required to check in to one of the closest sites. No campsite, and they're told to leave. We are not authorized to leave the station after dark under any circumstances. In an emergency, do not call 911, call the number, and do exactly what they say. We draw straws for who gets overnight shifts. Why we need to stay overnight if we can't do anything is beyond me. I asked the manager about it, and he just said that standard protocol is to have someone on hand to report any irregularities overnight. I have to work my overnight shift. I keep my phone close, the number dialed in, ready if I need to call. It is a bad night. I just wind up pacing around with my shotgun, glancing into the bright floodlights, trying to see what's past them. I hear crickets, and it relaxes me. Prey is quiet when predators are around. It was a long night. The next night, my manager draws the short straw. He seems resigned. In the end, we all have to take a turn. He brings the brightest damn tactical flashlight I've ever seen. Said he bought it just because he's afraid of the dark. He isn't really. He's afraid of the things in the dark. I get a phone call at 3 a.m. It's him.
Get over here now and bring guns!
What? You have a damn arsenal.
Now! Oh, I swear to God I screwed up. Oh man, I think they're attracted to the light. I called that number, and all they said was back up and be here in the morning. Oh, damn!
I hear the piercing staccato of gunshots. Pause. More gunshots. Screaming. Scuffling. The line goes dead. I call the number. A new, terse voice answers. Look, I work at Park. I just got off the phone with
I just spoke with What can you report?
Something bad's happened. It's serious. I heard gunshots.
We will have backup there as soon as possible. Did he see anything else?
Yeah, he said he thought they were attracted to the light. Doesn't make sense to me.
Interesting. Thank you for your report. Park is now closed. You will be reassigned. Goodbye.
Officially, the park was closed to be scheduled for a controlled burn. Let the old trees die and make room for new ones. There was nothing in the official report about what happened to the manager on duty. The public understanding was bureaucracies need to be shaken up on occasion. No one asked any more questions. I get transferred to a new park halfway across the country. Change of scenery and beautiful. I get some odd rules here too. Don't go far after dark. And don't carry a flashlight. I'm concerned about why. Why can't you use a flashlight at night when you need one? They won't tell me. Be safe, everyone.
The Crawlers. Written by Jimmy Juliano. Performed by Joseph Gable. I've never told this to anyone out of respect for my friend, Mike. It happened 20 years ago, but I think about it often. When I'm up late at night, my thoughts will drift away, and for a moment I'm a carefree kid with no worries and a wild imagination. As an adult, there are all sorts of rational answers to what transpired, but I've never quite latched onto one as the answer. But even though there are a dozen possible answers to what happened to us as kids, it all started with a single question. Have you seen the Crawlers? I was 10 years old at the time, and no, I hadn't seen the Crawlers. I didn't know what my friend Mike was talking about. He shoved his hands in his pockets and shifted his weight from foot to foot. He was talking faster than usual. Mike was certainly excited to tell me and our friend Tommy about the Crawlers, whatever they were. They are creatures that only come out at night, Mike insisted, and they don't come out all the time. If you see one, it will be slowly crawling through your yard, but only when it's really dark out. They don't want to be seen. It was a lazy summer afternoon, and we were just 3 kids wasting time on our bikes in a safe and relatively boring subdivision. Nothing should have creeped me out at that moment, but the term crawlers immediately gave me a case of the willies. The good kind of willies. The Crawlers sounded creepy, and I loved anything creepy. There's only 3 rules if you see a crawler, Mike said. Number 1, don't shine a light on a crawler. If you do, it will sneak into your house and kill you. I nodded and smiled. Tommy just rolled his eyes and shook his head. I looked down on Mike as he told his story, but not in the lack of respect sort of way. It was the literal sort of way. I was 8 inches taller than Mike. The doctor said that Mike was in the first percentile for height or something like that, and he might only ever grow a few more inches in his entire life. Tommy's parents once told us that Mike liked to make up stories to compensate for the fact that he was done growing and was such a weakling. I found that kind of mean. Number 2, Mike continued. If you go out to meet a crawler, you have to keep your eyes shut. Don't look at it. If you do, it will kill you and take over your life. It will mimic you. He paused and thought about it for a second. But I'm not sure about that one, Mike said. I think that's what I heard, but it might be different. I can't remember the rule completely. I smiled wider. This was really great. Tommy looked increasingly irritated. But the best rule of all is number 3, Mike said. If you go out in the middle of the night to meet a crawler and you keep your eyes shut, the crawler will reward you for being so brave. Say a wish out loud and it will come true. That's the power of the crawler. My mind immediately raced with the possibilities. I had never seen a crawler in my backyard, but I'd never looked that closely in the middle of the night before. Maybe there was something crawling through my yard when the moon was high and the world was asleep. My house did back up to a forest, and there were a bunch of trees and bushes in my yard. A crawler would probably be easy to miss. It could squirm across the property line from the forest and then disappear without me even realizing it. I gotta go, Mike said, hopping on his bike. Don't tell anyone else about the crawlers. They don't like it if too many people know about them. I could get in trouble for telling you. With that, Mike pedaled away on his bicycle, the black patented leather on his sneakers glistening in the sun as his bike pedal spun faster. Tommy scoffed and rolled his eyes again. I wish I was short. Then maybe my parents would buy me $100 shoes to make me feel better. I ignored Tommy's comment. My head was too preoccupied with the existence of crawlers. He's so full of crap, Tommy said. He's just playing a joke on you. Mike's never said anything smart in his whole life. You know he's in those special slow classes, right? There's no such thing as crawlers. Don't listen to him. But the thing was, I wanted to believe Mike. I wanted to believe in crawlers. So that night, I stayed up way later than I should have, just waiting at my window. I sat there with the lights off, just sipping on soda and trying hard to stay awake, gazing into my large backyard and out into the forest. I shone a flashlight on a comic book as I flipped through the pages, trying to keep my mind from sliding into sleep. And then, I saw it. A flicker of movement from the edge of the woods. I clicked off my flashlight and dropped to my knees, my eyes barely peeking above the windowsill. I couldn't believe it. It was a crawler. I tried not to look directly at it, because I was nervous that I'd be breaking the rules. I dropped down below the windowsill for a few seconds, and then slowly rose, careful not to look too long. I carefully sneaked a look, but then my eyes dashed away. I didn't hold my gaze for longer than 2 seconds at a time. I didn't want to break one of Mike's rules. But the creature was there, dragging itself through my dewy yard near the edge of the forest. Pale skin, skinny arms and legs, very deliberate and stiff movements, like it was struggling to move, all the while drenched in darkness. It was a crawler. At least I think it was. It was impossibly dark outside. I thought I saw its head turn, and I quickly dropped down again, worried it might see me. This time, I didn't get back up. I slept on the floor until sunup. The next day, I told Tommy about what I saw, and he laughed at me and shook his head. You can't be serious, he said. I can't believe you're falling for this. It's just Mike playing a trick on you. I'll get to the bottom of this before you look even stupider. I didn't listen to Tommy. I wanted crawlers to be real. The next night, I was determined to see the crawler again. I snuck outside at midnight with a sleeping bag under my arm. I wanted that crawler to come back, and this time I wanted my wish. I unrolled my sleeping bag near the edge of the forest and climbed inside, shivering with a mix of fear and anticipation. No one would understand how I felt. I remember thinking, no one would be brave enough to do what I was doing. I was dying for something as fantastic as a crawler to actually exist. It'd be like my favorite kind of movie come to life. Crickets chirped, and the occasional hoot of an owl echoed in the night. I laid in my sleeping bag under the stars for hours before I heard the noise, the rustling sound of a body being dragged across grass and dirt. I pinched my eyes shut and waited. The rustling came increasingly closer, and my eyes clamped shut even harder. The labored breath of whatever was inching closer grew louder. It must have been a few feet away when it stopped. And then I felt its hand gently rubbing my leg over the flannel sleeping bag. It stopped on my ankle and latched on tight. Its fingers felt unnaturally long, like they had wrapped themselves twice around my skinny leg. I wanted to look. I yearned to see this horrible creature before me, yet my eyes did not betray me. They stayed closed, even as the breathing of the crawler turned into a low growl. It was growing impatient. But then it dawned on me. I hadn't thought of my wish. In that moment, my mind blanked, and the grip on my leg tightened. I blurted out the first thing that popped into my head. "A dog!" I sputtered. "I've always wanted a dog! I wish for a dog!" The creature grunted and released the grip. My eyes burned with pain from the force of squeezing them shut. I listened closely as the rustling of the crawler's body slowly led into the forest, and the sounds vanished into the night. I jumped up, grabbed my sleeping bag, and hightailed it inside. The following morning, I was eating breakfast with my family when we heard a low whimper and scratching coming from the front door. It whined some more, and then it barked. I almost choked on my cereal. We opened the front door, and there sat an emaciated black Labrador. There was no collar, no form of identification. It dropped its head and looked at us with droopy eyes. Everyone immediately fell in love. "Can we keep it?" my little sister cried. "Oh, Daddy, please can we keep it?" My dad smiled. "We'll have to see whose dog this is, but if we can't find the owners, then I think we can keep it." I knew at that moment that we'd never find the owners. That dog would be ours. I finished breakfast and rode my bike like the wind to Tommy's house. I told him everything, but he was very disbelieving. He had that smug look on his face like he was just humoring me. "I hate to break it to you," Tommy said, "but that was Mike outside your house last night. I got the whole scoop from his older sister. Their parents have been fighting a lot. Yelling, throwing things, the whole deal. When Mike gets upset, he goes outside and crawls around the backyard. I guess he doesn't want to be around them, but still wants to hear what they're saying to each other. So he'll crawl around the yard, get close to different windows, and listen. His parents don't know that he does it. And sometimes," Tommy continued, "Mike will crawl around the yard even when his parents aren't fighting. That's what his sister says. Pretty weird." My heart broke that moment for Mike. That sounded awful. I couldn't imagine my parents fighting like that. Yet something still wasn't sitting right. "What about the dog?" I asked. "How do you explain the dog? My wish came true." Tommy shrugged his shoulders. "Maybe it's a coincidence. Or maybe Mike found a dog and brought it to your house as part of the joke. But Mike is the crawler. He has to be." Tommy made a good point. It made perfect sense that Mike was the crawler. I was ready to drop the entire situation, but I still wasn't entirely convinced. I needed to find out for sure. That night, I waited again. I lay in my sleeping bag near the forest's edge, hypnotized by the soundtrack of the night when the familiar rustling returned. I pinched my eyes shut again, ready to make another wish. This one would prove if the crawler was real or not. The crawler lurched on the ground towards me, and soon it was at my feet, gripping me with both hands this time. It pulled itself on top of me, dragging its body across mine. It breathed heavy and hard. Every movement it made was a colossal struggle. Its face was now inches from mine, and I felt its cold breath on my nose as it inhaled and exhaled, but my eyes remained shut. Its hands rubbed up and down on my face, like a blind man searching another face for recognition. There was no blurting out from me on this night. I knew exactly what I'd be wishing for. "I wish for my friend Mike's parents to stop fighting," I said. "I wish for them to not yell at each other anymore." The creature gasped and rolled off of me. I felt it lying next to me. Its breath quickened and intermixed with light sniffling. "I know it's you, Mike," I said, "and I do wish for your parents to stop fighting. You don't need to crawl around and spy on people anymore." I didn't look, but I felt the crawler roll up into a ball and cradle itself. I lay still, eyes always closed. I'm not sure how long we laid like that in the summer night, and eventually, even though I was paralyzed with a mix of sadness, apprehension, and utter terror, I fell asleep. I awoke to the sun rising. The crawler was gone. 3 days later, Mike announced to us that his parents were getting divorced. They were sick of the fighting. They were tired of the screaming matches. They brought out the worst in each other, and it was time for them to split up. As Mike told us the story, he gave me a knowing look. A moment passed between us, a moment of recognition. Mike knew that I was aware of his parents' problems, and I gave him a reassuring glance and a tiny smile. Mike wouldn't be crawling around his yard anymore. His parents' fighting would finally be over. My wish had come true. None of us talked about the crawlers again. We were kids and we moved on to other things. And talking about the crawlers just felt wrong. I didn't want to dredge up Mike's unhappy memories about his parents fighting and divorce. That would be cruel. So I just let it go. But 3 years later, the crawler came back into my life one last time, if only for an evening. I was 13, and I was up late watching a movie at my house with Mike. He was asleep on the couch, and I went to the kitchen for a glass of water. I mindlessly gazed out the window and spotted something plodding on the ground near the edge of the forest. It couldn't be. I quickly turned away, hesitant to look directly at it. I thought hard about the rules of the crawler, but my mind was blank. What were they again? One popped into my head. Don't shine a light on the crawler. I switched off the kitchen light, and I made sure the backyard light was off. Our black lab sidled up to me, nosing at my leg. I reached down and scratched its head, and my dog moaned in appreciation. What was another rule? It had been so long. My head strained, and Mike's words came back to me. If you go out in the middle of the night to meet a crawler, keep your eyes shut. The crawler will reward you for being so brave. Say a wish out loud, and it will come true. I wasn't going out there this time. I didn't have any more wishes at the moment. My main wish had come true, and Mike was much happier once the shouting in his house had stopped. He had even shot up 7 inches in the past few years. He was no longer the shortest kid in our class. I glanced down at my dog, then back outside. I squinted hard, and I tried to make out the creature in the distance. I looked over at the couch, and Mike was still sleeping peacefully. But what was the third rule? I just couldn't recall. The crawler dragged itself methodically around the back of my yard. If the rules were true, I knew I shouldn't look closely at it. But I couldn't help myself. The crawler was as I remembered it, skinny and disjointed. A shimmer from the moon caught my reflection. It was the shoes. Those expensive shoes with the patented shiny leather. They gleamed and glistened. I squinted harder, and the creature crawled directly into the moonlight. We made eye contact, and we held it for several seconds. The creature that stared back at me was Mike. I dropped down to the kitchen floor, and I breathed in and out slowly. That crawler in my yard. It looked familiar, but it wasn't the Mike sleeping on my couch. It reminded me of 10-year-old Mike. Skinny, short, and weak Mike. He was even wearing Mike's special and expensive shoes. He was the only kid in school that ever had them. But Mike outgrew them 2 years ago, when he defied the doctor's predictions and started growing like crazy. Mike tossed that pair of shoes in the garbage. They didn't fit, he said. They made his feet hurt. Something wasn't right. My head was spinning. What was the third rule? What did Mike say to me 3 years ago when we were only 10? I scanned my brain and fumbled through memories, and then it bubbled up to the surface. If you go out to meet a crawler, you have to keep your eyes shut. Don't look at it. If you do, it will kill you and take over your life. It will mimic you. I rose and peeked out the window. The patented leather flickered once more at the edge of my lawn, and little Mike carefully slithered along the forest's edge. And at that moment, I was convinced that crawlers were real, and maybe Mike had just screwed up the rules. He said 3 years ago that he wasn't sure about the mimic rule, didn't he? Perhaps Mike had gotten the details wrong. Maybe the crawler doesn't kill you and then assume your life. Maybe it leaves you alive, makes a copy of you, and assumes your life. Then maybe you become the crawler. I looked out that kitchen window again, and I saw nothing. There was no movement, no plodding creature squirming near the forest. The crawler was gone. I returned to the living room, settled back into the recliner, and gazed at my friend. He slept peacefully, softly snoring. I shook my head, laughing at my foolishness. Maybe the 10-year-old me believed in the fantastic. The 13-year-old me didn't believe there were now 2 Mikes. One dozing on my couch and another living in some weird crawler limbo. That type of awesome creepiness just wasn't possible. there must have been a rational answer. But at that moment, I knew I would never mention it to anyone. The crawlers were just too sensitive of a subject. I would never say a word. I would never ask Mike to wade into his pool of hurtful memories, because the Mike I've remained friends with to this very day has too much going for him. By his senior year of high school, my friend Mike was the tallest kid in the class, and the best athlete in the school. That Mike graduated college with a physics degree, high honors, and a perfect girlfriend who later became his wife. The Mike I know has a mother that got remarried to a great guy, and I couldn't be happier for that Mike and his family. But my mind always returns to the crawlers, and that's why I still gaze out my window in the middle of the night, looking for a glimmer of those old shoes from 20 years ago, looking for a 10-year-old lost in time. I sometimes wonder if my old friend Mike became a crawler. Poor, weak 10-year-old Mike, with the arguing parents, expensive shoes, and fantastic tales. I know it's stupid, but I do it anyway. And when I do, I feel like an awful person. I feel like I'm admitting that the real Mike would have never amounted to anything. That the real Mike would have remained short and weak for the rest of his life. That the real Mike is now just a lost, helpless creature. I don't want to think these things, but I can't stop myself. And every time I do it, I think about Mike's rules for the crawlers. I remember clearly those 3 rules he told me and Tommy on that lazy summer afternoon, all those years ago. Maybe Mike did get them wrong.
I honestly don't know where to begin. I'll start with the basic stuff. My name is Alex. I'm 22 years old. From 1999 till 2003, I attended a small elementary school in Georgia called Warwood Elementary. It was a private but non-religious school, around maybe 300 kids total at the time. I was an only child, and my parents were divorced. I never saw my dad after the split, and my mom engaged a new boyfriend, but they never married, just stayed engaged. Anyways, I don't remember my first year at Warwood very clearly, as I was in kindergarten. I made a friend named Tony, and we stuck together up until I moved in 2004. I'm not going to waste your time with useless details about my life, though. I'm going to tell you about the weird stuff. First grade, the year 2000. Tony and I were in Miss Anderson's class. She was in her 30s, had short hair, kind of looked like Jamie Lee Curtis in her later years. She was extraordinarily sweet and compassionate. Parents and students alike loved her. Different grades had different recess times at Warwood. Pre-K through 2nd grade had it at 11:30 through 12, and 3rd through 5th had it at 12 through 12:30. Our playground was massive, despite our small classes. The main playground island had a slide, a bridge, ladders, monkey bar, and a huge plastic rock dome with little dinosaur bones on the ceiling beneath it. It was the Dino Dome, as we called it. Tony and I would meet up there with Scotty and Phil, our friends from 2nd grade. Both Scotty and Phil had older siblings. Scotty's brother was in 4th grade, and Phil's sister was in 5th. Both had attended Warwood since pre-K. Sometime during my 1st grade year, I remember a rumor went around about the bad chair, and Scotty was positive that his brother Mark had been sent to it. I first heard of the bad chair at lunchtime, right after recess. I think a boy named Eddie mentioned it to me in a hushed tone. "Alex, you know about the bad chair?" I shook my head. Many of my responses to adults and children alike were motions instead of words. I was rather shy. "You want to know about the bad chair?" I nodded. "Okay. You know the teacher's place near the girls' potty room?" The teacher's place was a small break room or staff room for teachers. Small place, probably had a fridge and a bathroom. I nodded again. "Well, some kid says he's seen inside there. He says there's another door." Impossible, I thought. No child, living or dead, had seen into the teacher's place. "How'd he see it?" I asked, unbelieving. "He had to go to the potty on his way back to Mrs. Tudor's class. He saw a teacher go in. When the door opened, He says there was a table, chairs, and another door. So that's where the bad chair is. I still don't know what that is. You know J-Boy? J-Boy was a very misbehaved fourth grader. Everybody knew who he was. Just that week, he'd been expelled for bad behavior. Uh-huh. Remember how he messed up Mrs. Ludke's desk last week? And then how he used his Boy Scout stuff to set all the tests on fire? Uh-huh. Well, he got something worse than detention. Well, yeah, he got kicked out. Eddie giggled condescendingly. That's what they want you to think. They? The teachers. J-Boy doesn't even live here anymore. He lives at the hospital now. Why? The bad chair. Of course, then lunch was over, leaving me with an undying curiosity about the bad chair. I think that was a Friday. So after the weekend came and went, I met up with my pals in the Dino Dome and asked if they had heard about the bad chair and J-Boy's fate. Someone told me about that. I think it's a big fat fib, Tony announced, crossing his arms. Eddie told me a little, but he had to go when he reached the good stuff. What is the bad chair? Then from the side of the Dino Dome, the bald head of Steve peeked in. Steve was a 5th grader who was really sick and was allowed 2 recesses. You guys talking about the bad chair? It was extremely rare for a 5th grader, even a special one like Steve, to talk with the likes of 1st graders. We all froze, stunned to have his attention. You better not let the teachers hear. Why not? Phil squeaked. You might get sent there. Steve scanned the playground and crept inside the Dino Dome. And who knows what'll happen after that? What is the bad chair, you guys? I was quite flustered at this point and just wanted to know what the darn thing was, true or not. It's beneath the school. You could only get to it through a door in the teacher's lounge. Yeah, the 5th graders called the teacher's place a lounge. Far too fancy for our taste. And what's it do? I inquired. Bad things. Well, duh. My friends gasped. No one talked to 5th graders like that. Steve, however, didn't seem to care. He once again looked outside of the Dino Dome as if to make sure no teachers were around. You guys know about J-Boy, right? Yeah, we replied simultaneously. He's a hero. If it weren't for him, none of us would know about the bad chair. He's been here a long time, but he's the first one to escape it. Escape it? Yup. After J-Boy did all that bad stuff, everyone in Ludke's class saw him get sent out to the principal's office. But not really. Ludke took him into the lounge, and whoever was in the lounge took him down the stairs to the room with the bad chair. How do you know all this? Tony interrupted, still skeptical. He told his best friend Finn from my class about it, before he went crazy. He said that the room they took him to was really dark, except for some candles on the floor. In the middle is the bad chair. It's wooden and has a bunch of leather straps that they tied him into. But on the top, where your head goes, there's a skull. A human skull? Phil shuddered. Steve frowned. No. No one said anything. Then what? I urged. Then they began. Began what? Dancing. I laughed, thinking this was all a build-up to a big joke. Steve just shook his head. Not funny dancing. Weird dancing. He said they twisted and bent in impossible ways. He said they were wearing black clothes. They were whispering. He screamed, but no one could hear him. He was too far down. How'd he get out? Tony finally looked a little unsettled. Something went wrong. Steve gulped, almost like he were there himself. Something joined them. Hello, boys. Mrs. Chandler, the recess attendant, stepped inside the Dino Dome. We all screamed. Mrs. Chandler jumped, startled by our cries, then laughed. Steve went pale. Paler than usual. Telling scary stories to the young ones, Stevie? Mrs. Chandler asked. Yes, ma'am. Chandler pursed her lips into a smile. Nothing too dark, I hope. Steve shook his head. None of us looked at her. Well, only 5 more minutes until the young ones go back to class. I suppose you'll be out here with the others, Stephen? Yes, ma'am, replied Steve almost robotically. Any more scary stories? No, ma'am. Good. Very good. With that, Mrs. Chandler patted one of us on the back and left. Steve looked like he was about to cry and ran out of the Dino Dome. We didn't see him again. The days following our talk with Steve were quiet and seemingly normal. Steve was absent, and most students said that was because of his frequent hospital visits. My friends and I suspected otherwise. Tony, however, raised some good questions regarding the J-Boy situation, though. Why weren't his parents doing anything about this? Surely somebody had told them about all the bad chair rumors. And if other kids had been sent to the bad chair, why didn't they remember? They couldn't have died or vanished because people would notice the large numbers of disappearances and deaths. As the days passed, we learned more information about the bad chair. Sometimes by kids in our grade, but usually from 4th and 5th graders. Apparently, if the bad chair worked, you didn't remember any of it happening. That was what made the J-Boy thing so important. For the first time, something had gone wrong, and he remembered everything. Plenty of other kids had gone, they just didn't know it. Where the 4th and 5th graders received this intel is still unknown to me. A few months went by, and the talks of the bad chair and J-Boy died down. We were told by Princener Ebner that Steve had spent his last months in hospital fighting hard, but had sadly passed away from cancer. Tony concluded that the bad chair was nothing more than a scary story made up by the 5th graders to freak out us younger kids. We just about believed that until the very last day of our 1st grade year. Summer was approaching fast, so naturally everyone was very excited. And with the excitement comes shenanigans, so to say. For that last day, our 1st grade class joined with Miss Ludke's 2nd grade class, and we all had a fun little pizza party. We were playing games, singing songs, telling stories, the usual. Then a 2nd grader named William ran through the classroom door, sobbing. He had left just a few minutes before to use the restroom. All the children looked upset and concerned for our classmate, but Miss Anderson and Miss Ludke just exchanged serious glances. Anderson was the first to approach him. "Will, sweetheart, what's wrong?" William could hardly stand up, and he had sobbed so hard that he had vomited a little bit onto the carpet. The other kids were grossed out by this and upchucked their own pizza slices. Ludke called for assistance in cleanup while Anderson patted Will on the back and urged him to share what had upset him. "Steve! It's Steve!" he finally cried, eyes shut tight. "What?" Miss Anderson tightened her grip on the boy and tried to pull him out into the hall. He shrieked in protest and curled into the fetal position. One of the adults who had been called to the room, room mom, offered to call his parents. "Wait," said Miss Anderson. "Let's see if he calms down." The room mom looked a tad bothered by the response, but agreed to wait just a few more minutes. Miss Anderson asked William again what had happened. He finally opened his eyes, which seemed to have been shut for the entirety of his presence. Ludke attempted to distract the rest of us in vain. "I saw Steve. I saw Steve," whimpered Will, eyes red and swollen. "Steve who?" Anderson asked, knowing very well which Steve the child meant. "Dead Steve." The room fell silent for Will's sniffles and coughs. Ludke and the other adults escorted us from the classroom while Miss Anderson talked to Will. We all whispered amongst ourselves until we were ordered to remain quiet until our parents arrived. The end of the day had come, and oddly enough, none of us wanted to leave. We needed to know what Will saw. None of us found out, that is, until 2nd grade year started. I haven't much to say about that summer, except that most nights were spent wondering about Will, Steve, and the bad chair. I would ask Tony if he'd heard anything, and he'd ask Phil, who would ask Scotty, but no one had. Day 1 of 2nd grade, Tony and I met up and started asking around about William. who would now be in 3rd grade with Scotty and Phil. None other than Eddie, the same boy who first told me about the bad chair, provided us with the answers. William doesn't go to school here anymore. He's being homeschooled, I think. Why? What happened? This conversation took place in the few minutes we had before class started. He said that while he was taking a pee-pee, he heard weird squishy sounds and growling. When he opened up the door, Dead Steve was on the ground, wiggling about. Only he wasn't dead. And he wasn't even Steve. How could Steve not be Steve? He was something else, too. Like what? I don't know. No one does. It's all I heard. Steve was both alive and something else. After that, Will started seeing a doctor, and now he's schooled at home. Miss Ludke, who is now our teacher, whistled and ordered us all to take our seats. She told us that students would no longer go to the bathroom by themselves, but would always bring a buddy. This was obviously because of the Steve and J-Boy incidents. During recess for the beginning of the year, Mrs. Shaunder would poke her head into the Dino Dome quite often, even when my pals and I weren't hanging around there. She started doing it so much that we stopped going there altogether and instead walked around the playground at a steady pace if we needed to talk. One day, Scotty said that his older brother, who was now in 5th grade, had been sent to detention for cheating on a test. Scotty asked him what detention was like. Caleb, his brother, said he didn't remember. Said he fell asleep or something. Scotty began crying and started bringing up the bad chair. Mrs. Shaunder saw us. He doesn't feel well, I told her, when asked what the tears were about. Scotty held his tongue and went along with it. Mrs. Shaunder asked if he'd like to see the nurse, offering to walk him back. Scotty refused, but began to cry harder. Then recess ended. Mrs. Shaunder guided us back to class. Then we saw her go into the teacher's place down the hall. Now this I remember clearly. Just 2 rooms down, the kindergarten class was having nap time. We were having a math lesson. Miss Ludke was talking about basic fractions or something when all the lights went out. We heard screaming and crying. Lots of it. Ludke ran out of the room, leaving us with her assistant named Rachel, who told us to remain calm. About 3 minutes passed before the lights came back on. The screaming and crying had lasted without a single pause for the entire period of darkness. When light returned, they ceased almost immediately. It was the kindergartners, Miss Ludke told us. They were afraid of the dark. That wasn't even close to what the kindergartners at recess told us. The day following the power outage and screams at recess, my friends and I decided to ask some kindergartners what had caused them so much fright. Many kindergartners were not at school that day, but we managed to find a few who all told an extremely similar story. For the sake of readability, I will change the language and grammar they use to be more coherent. The accounts that follow are obviously not how kindergartners talk, but rather how I edited them. All the details are exactly as they said, just touched up. First we asked a blonde girl. I don't recall her name. Before nap time started, Miss Natasha prayed for us. This was already a bizarre thing to hear, as our school was non-religious. Parents had gotten into fits over any mention of religious activity or influence by teachers. She wasn't praying to God. She was praying to something else. I can't pronounce it. It didn't sound like English. She mentioned Steve, Dead Steve, and J-Boy, and it made us feel weird, like tingly, sleepier than we were before. I don't know how long we were asleep before something came. What came? The girl started trembling and looked like she was about to cry, but in an instant she calmed down, even smiled a bit. It was beautiful, she said. So beautiful. She didn't say much else, but another kindergartner did. Miss Natasha prayed for us before nap time started. I started feeling odd after she mentioned Steve and J-Boy and something else. I don't know how to say it. It was weird, but I got sleepy real fast. I saw my friends close their eyes, but I fought to keep mine open because I wasn't sleepy before, and I kind of had to pee. I pulled my blanket over my head so Miss Natasha wouldn't notice I was awake. The kid had a particularly blank stare and expressionless face. We had found him sitting by the swing set, not doing anything at all. I heard the classroom door open, and Miss Natasha walked out. I could tell because I heard her heels clicking against the floor. I took off my blanket, and then something joined. What? What joined? I snapped, having had the answer taken away last time. It knew I was awake. It didn't want me to be awake. I shouldn't have been awake. The boy's pace started to increase, and it was hard to catch every word. He was not in a state of panic like the other child, though. It stood above me, stood right above me. A heavy weight was on me, but I knew it wasn't touching me. I was scared. I wanted to cry, but I didn't. I didn't cry, and I should have been asleep, and we couldn't understand any more after that. We talked to one more kindergartner, and his name I remember. His name was Joshua L. He had tennis ball friends. You know the tennis balls they cut open and put on the legs of chairs? Yeah, he took those off and drew eyes on them and talked to them. We saw him do it at recess a lot. Anyway, we talked to him, and every time he said something, he moved the mouths of his tennis ball friends. We were getting ready to sleep when Miss Natasha said a prayer for us. Her God is a funny name, and he cares about dead Steve and Jay. I got all warm and jingly, so I closed my eyes to sleep, and then I slept. And then something came, Tony interjected. Joshua put one of his tennis balls right in Tony's face. Yes, something did. I know this because we all woke up and the lights were off. Miss Natasha had left them on. I didn't know where she was. Then we all screamed. All of us. At first we didn't know why. Not even me. I was screaming and I didn't even know why. I screamed until it hurt. I felt like I had to. No teachers came in to check on us, no matter what they said. We were alone with something. It touched all of us, one by one. It knew my name. None of us said anything. Then Joshua said something. It was unpronounceable. And then he smiled, and recess was over. No kindergartners told their parents what had happened. No one else asked, or if they did, they didn't say. Just me, Tony, Scotty, and Phil knew what Josh and the others had said. School continued like normal. For years. Anticlimactic, right? Nope. I don't think things were actually normal, because I found something out just 3 days ago. My mom told me a story about my second grade year that I didn't remember. She said my friends and I had drawn nasty stuff on our teacher's whiteboard. She said we got sent to detention for that. I don't remember that at all. I know what happened. Only one explanation. We didn't draw stuff on the whiteboard. We didn't get sent to detention. We got sent somewhere else. We took a seat in the bad chair, and whatever happened there worked. All my memories of the rest of second grade and third grade and fourth grade cannot be trusted. I returned to Augusta, Georgia to find Warwood. Instead, I found a different school in its place, which for their sake I will not name. The building, though, was same as Warwood, was refurbished and painted differently. I entered the school and asked the front desk about its history, explaining that I used to attend the school when it was called Warwood. Oh yes, Warwood. It was renamed after the management change in '04. Management change? Yes, most of the original staff quit or relocated rather abruptly to many different places. DuPont, Fayetteville, D.C., Firebroker, Philly. I paused. Was any reconstruction done to the interior? My eyes glanced down the hall where the teacher's lounge had originally been. Oh, no, I don't think so. Why? I just have some fuzzy memories in one room. I'd like to clear them up. I'm afraid I can't let you into any of the rooms without special permission. That's okay, I understand. Would you happen to know if any of the old teachers from Warwood still work here? Just one, I believe. Who? Natasha Tuger. She still teaches kindergarten. Did she teach you? Not me personally, but I do remember her. Would you like to speak with her after school? The day ends in about an hour. Yes, I would appreciate that. Thanks. I took a seat outside the office and browsed on my phone. The woman at the front desk had called Natasha's room and informed her that she had a visitor. What's your name, sir? She asked me. Alex. His name is Alex. He's a former student. Some brief conversation passed, and then she hung up. Natasha remembers you. She's very excited to see you. Good. I smiled. My heart was skipping beats, and I felt nauseous, but I did my best to hide it. I excused myself to the restroom, which was exactly where I remembered it. I recalled the story about dead Steve appearing in this very bathroom, and I knew the teacher's lounge was just a room over. I did my business, and as I washed my hands, a child entered. Hello, said the boy. Hello, said the boy. Hey. I'm good with children. The children I know, that is. At this point, I was afraid of being labeled a pervert who spoke with children in an elementary restroom, however, and did my best to avoid saying much of anything. But kids these days can be very social, and this one was. Are you someone's daddy? Nope. Why wasn't this boy even going to the bathroom? He was standing outside the stalls, watching me wash my hands. You look like someone's daddy. Okay. I dried my hands and awkwardly waved goodbye. The boy remained still, staring. As I left the restroom, I looked to my left and saw the door to the lounge. The door had been redone and was far fancier now. It even said Teacher's Lounge on the window. Very cliché. I casually strolled by and looked inside with my eyes corners. I didn't see anyone. Then I got a bad idea. I decided to test the doorknob. It was unlocked. So I went inside. Fridge, coffee table, sink, staffed restroom, chairs, door. The same door I had seen glimpses of in my time at Warwood. I did a precautionary check behind me, confirming that no teachers were heading inside, not that I'd be able to avoid them anyhow. Then I returned my attention to the door. It was now or never, I supposed. I approached it with a trembling hand and twisted the doorknob. It creaked open exactly how you'd imagine an old door would. I peered into a dark staircase that descended straight downward. Cold air washed over my face and my head began to throb. I took a step inside and the throbbing grew worse. It did with every step down. There was no light I could see at the bottom, yet I continued with my phone screen as a guide. The pain in my head stretched down to my spine. My body knew I had been here before, and whatever happened wasn't good. As I reached the bottom of the stairwell, I spotted a light switch on the right with my phone. I flicked it on, not knowing what to expect. Boxes. Lots of boxes. And shelves. No bad chair, no candles, no satanic symbols or skeletons or pictures of children. Despite this, my head and back still ached. Welcome back, Alex. Natasha stood on the bottom step, smiling and dressed in a floral gown. I'm leaving. Out of my way. I did not know how threatening I sounded, though I did try. Open up a box, Alex. I said move. I walked forward with fists balled, but she did not care. She did not even look at me. She looked behind me, her grin wider. What the hell did you do to me in here? I had broken. I had given in and asked. She knew I was afraid. She had leverage. Natasha said the same thing that girl in kindergarten class had said. It was beautiful. So beautiful. Then she pointed to the storage boxes. Take a look. No. Yes, I wanted to. Or at least something inside me wanted to. But I refused. Tony, Scott, Phil, they came back too. Shut up! Natasha moved past me, very gently, as though walking on air. I wanted to burst up the stairs, but something held me back. She knelt down by a rather large box to the right of the room and opened it. It had not been sealed. She stuck her entire left arm inside of it and grunted as she lifted an object out. As soon as I saw it, I fell to my knees. I remembered it, just barely. The skull, not of a human, and of no animal I had ever seen. I was frozen in place. The pain in my body was now so extreme that I wish I had a way to kill myself. Natasha spoke, but it was unpronounceable. Then she placed the skull on top of my head. In my mind, I saw them all. The teachers dressed in black, the candles, the bonds of my wrists and ankles, the robed ones. The way they moved, the way they bent, their faces distorted beyond imagination. The shaking of the ground beneath me, the freezing blast of wind from somewhere else. Then they all shrieked and bowed. In the corner I saw Tony and Phil and Scotty. They were sobbing and vomiting. Their eyes rolled back in their heads. I returned to the moment at hand and watched Natasha die. That demented bald boy with something on him was tearing at her flesh. Dead Steve. My eyes closed, and I heard the screams of kindergartners, the prayers of Natasha, the songs of the faculty, the unpronounceable. I remembered all those days at school after I had taken a seat in the bad chair. My throne. The hours spent being worshipped, the plans, the visions, unpronounceable entering children, entering me. It didn't always work. Dead Steve, J-Boy. But when it did work, it worked well. There's a little piece of something everywhere. He left me for a while, but he's back now. He always comes back. To all of us. There's nothing that can be done about it. Everyone will sit down. Everyone will be someone.
Chilling tales for dark nights.